We are talking about a topic that a lot of folks who are very concerned with the climate crisis are looking for avenues to decarbonize this state, and Northwestern has indicated that it is interested in putting small-scale nuclear reactors at Colstrip when the plant closes. In Northwestern's mind, that might not be until, 2055 or something. But anyway, nuclear is an issue that MEIC has been investigating for a while. We were very supportive in the initiative that Montana had that was eliminated back in 2021 that required a public vote on whether the state would allow nuclear facilities to be sited in Montana. We're disappointed that the public no longer has that vote, but we are willing to consider all decarbonization strategies. And so when MEIC started considering nuclear, we read a lot of material, and some of that writing was from David Schlissel with the Institute of Energy Economics and Financial Analysis regarding just the financial component of nuclear energy. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. And we are very thankful that David was willing to join us in this conversation. He has participated in many conversations regarding energy in Montana over the years. He's been involved in the economics of Colstrip and other things as well. But David has been a really sound mind when he comes before the Public Service Commission or helps us figure out what the economic viability of various energy resources may really be. So I want to thank David for being here, as well as to all of you. And I'm going to pass it off to, and I also want to thank our partners in this, Sierra Club. We are really appreciative of the Montana chapter of the Sierra Club, who is co-hosting this evening. So with that, David, it's all yours.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen, but before I do, I want to, excuse me, I've got a respiratory infection. I want to thank Anne for reassuring everybody that I'm of sound mind in giving the presentation. I wouldn't have you think otherwise. Okay. Does this look okay to everyone?
Looks great.
Okay. Welcome. Fortunately, we have some time, so I don't have to rush too much to get through the slides. And a lot of it's going to be basic. A lot of it you may have heard before, but I think that the whole narrative tells an important story. What is an SMR? The S part of it, small, is in there so that people don't feel so threatened by it. Generally defined as reactors that are 300 megawatts or smaller, but you can group them together. You could put 4 300 megawatt SMRs in the same site. So you'd have a 1,200 megawatt plant, essentially. The modular refers to the idea that plants would be fabricated in factories and then assembled on site. Some of the designs are scaled down versions of the boiling water and pressurized water reactors we have today. There are also proposals for technologies that have previously been tried and that have failed or that have never been tried at all. Prime on that is located southeast of you folks, the Bill Gates reactor, TerraPower. Approximately 80 SMR designs are being proposed around the world so far. I'm going to go through 8 key risks. The first is that the U.S. nuclear industry has a long history of being unable to meet estimated costs and schedules. There have been hundreds of billions of dollars of cost overruns and years-long schedule delays. None of the current SMRs being marketed have been built anywhere. There are roughly three, well, it depends on how you consider them, 2 or 3 SMRs in existence. 2 are on board icebreakers in Russia and 1 in China. I just read that one of the ones in Russia recently caught fire, so I don't know whether we're down to 1 in Russia or there's still 2. None of these designs have been licensed in the US or in Canada, as well as not being licensed anywhere else, but I focused on those 2. Some of the proposals, as I mentioned before, have exotic designs that have never been tried or that have tried and failed. SMRs are not good tools for fighting climate change. They're too expensive and take too long to build. The recent cancellation of the proposed first NuScale small modular reactor and the tanking of NuScale stock prices are flashing warning signs for governments, utilities, ratepayers, and private investors. Another key warning sign is that except for NuScale, SMR vendors are refusing to make public their estimated costs. Down in Wyoming, TerraPower, Bill Gates's company, refuses to acknowledge what it's going to cost. The Wyoming Public Service Commission, in its integrated resource planning process, has placeholder numbers in there, and they won't even discuss to the public what those placeholder numbers are. And finally, a key risk for SMR is increasing competition from truly declining cost renewable sources and storage. And here I would mention that if you go to the IEFA website, ieefa.org, my colleagues Seth Feaster and Dennis Wamstead have started a quarterly newsletter on the transition to renewables. Today was the first version of the quarterly newspaper. It's excellent. It's filled with a lot of useful information for folks all around the country. How expensive can SMR power get? Very. When the NuScale SMR was canceled in November, its target price was $119 per megawatt hour. That's more expensive than Colstrip even. That did not include Inflation Reduction Act subsidies of $30 a megawatt hour. So the net target price was $89 per megawatt hour. But that's not as high as the price of power can get. On this slide, we have 2 quotes from the chief executive officers of Constellation Energy and NextEra Energy that you can see are very concerned about the cost of money from SMRs. I love the second line from the CEO of NextEra Energy, that right now he looks at SMR as an opportunity to lose money in smaller batches. That takes me back to the days when we said that Talon was losing money on Colstrip, and they denied it, and then they admitted to the legislature that they were hemorrhaging it. But there's no cap on how high the price of power can go. Expect the worst. Back in the 50s and early 60s, when nuclear power was first promoted, it was really a way to justify the military use of atomic power. And the promise was atomic power would be too cheap to meter. The reality became that nuclear power plants were too expensive to build. This is from a DOE study of the overnight costs of 75 reactors that started in construction some between 66 and 77. The overnight cost means what would it have cost to build the reactor if it could be built overnight. So there's no escalation, no inflation, and there are no financing costs. The estimated cost of these 75 reactors was $34 billion. The actual cost was $108 billion. Now, the interesting thing is these are in 1982 year dollars. If we escalated that to 2024 year dollars, it would probably be double that. As you can see, the construction schedule was on average double what had been claimed by the promoters at the beginning of construction. So what did the nuclear industry say after this first wave of reactors became too expensive to build? They claimed that they had new reactor designs that would benefit from modular construction in terms of both shorter construction times and lower costs. But as you'll see in a moment, these benefits did not materialize, and this language is nearly identical to what current SMR vendors are claiming for their projects. So did these claims lead to less expensive nuclear units? Not at all. Over 20 new reactor projects were proposed. Only 4 began construction, 2 reactors in South Carolina and 2 in Georgia at the Vogtle project. The 2 reactors in South Carolina were canceled after their estimated costs had gone up, and something like $9 billion had already been spent. Vogtle, this is probably the biggest understatement I've made in my 50 years of doing this work, is that the Vogtle experience was much worse than projected. The originally estimated cost was $14 billion. The currently estimated, because it's Unit 4 is not quite done, is $36 billion. The estimated cost of power by the staff of the Georgia Public Service Commission is roughly $160 a megawatt hour. When Westinghouse claimed that the design for Vogtle, it was called an AP1000. They claimed it would take roughly 3 years to build, but that was only through fuel load. Excuse me, so we added some months on to get the schedule to be from the start of nuclear construction to operation. So Westinghouse's claim was roughly for less than 4 years. It took 10.3 years for the actual completion of Vogtle 3. And the current estimate for Vogtle 4, if it's finished in 2 months, will be 10.7 years. So it takes a long time to build large reactors, and it takes a long time, and they're very expensive. Who'll bear most of the cost of Vogtle's cost overrun? No big surprise. The ratepayers of Vogtle's owners will have to bear the greatest part of the cost overruns. Georgia Power Company owns 45.7% of the project. Its ratepayers will bear a large portion of that. There are 3 other owners that are municipal utilities. Their ratepayers are likely to bear all of the cost overrun. So now that we're in the 2020s, What claims does the nuclear industry now make for SMRs after Vogtle? It's mostly the same as they made before. Simplified, modular, ultra-compact nuclear island, costliest part of any reactor, reduces construction cost and schedule. That's what Westinghouse now says. And if we hop back, whoops, wrong direction. We hop back a few slides, you can see that Westinghouse said almost the same, different words, same meaning. But modular construction did not help them then, and we doubt it will help them now. The industry and its supporters also claim that by building lots of SMRs of the same design, the cost of power, on the megawatt hour basis will decline. That is, there will be a learning curve that will lead to cost reductions. Now, this stands on its head what they said before. What they said before was, if we build bigger reactors, we'll get economies of scale because they'll be larger. Now they say, well, if we build them smaller, we'll get economies of scale because we can build a lot of them. My advice is don't believe either. Have the estimated costs of any proposed SMRs gone up? Yes. The estimated cost of NuScale's proposed SMR in Utah more than doubled before it was canceled in November. You can see here 4 cost estimates. These are on $1 per kilowatt basis, which is generally what the industry talks about, or dollars per megawatt. And they're in year 2022 dollars. So that eliminates the impact of inflation. As the estimated cost of building the NuScale SMR rose, so did its projected cost of power, or these targeted cost of power. These were not promised or guaranteed costs. In 2016, they said, oh, it'll be $55 a megawatt hour, a lot cheaper than renewables. In 2021, they said it'll be $58 a megawatt hour, still a lot cheaper than renewables. And then at the beginning of about a year ago this week, they said that the cost had gone up to $89 a megawatt hour, which didn't include the $30 IRA subsidy from the Inflation Reduction Act. In 2021 and 2023, they claimed we didn't know what we were talking about, that the cost wasn't going to go up. They said nasty things. And now when reporters call me and ask me to comment, say they're going to talk to the company and ask me whether I have any questions for the company, I ask them to ask the company when they're going to apologize for saying nasty things about our work. The cost of power from the NuScale SMR would have continued to go up. There were still 7 years to go before it would have been finished. Have investors been hurt by the increasing cost of NuScale's SMR? You bet. Excuse me. The NuScale stock price hit a high of $14.87 per share in mid-August of 2022, right after the company went public. I checked today, and as of this morning, the current price was $2.41 per share. So if you invested in NuScale, you've lost more than 3/4 of your investment. Is there any estimate that SMRs will be less expensive than future reactors? Because what they said was, by building smaller reactors, they'll be cheaper. For example, they said they'd be cheaper than Vogtle. So what I did was, the last estimate we had for NuScale's, the CFPP was a carbon-free power project, is what they called the project that was going to be built in Idaho to serve communities, mostly in Utah. The cost in 2022 dollars was roughly $20,000 per kilowatt. If you take the total cost of Vogtle, remembering that Vogtle is a lot bigger in megawatts, escalate all the costs that was spent between 2008 and projected to be spent before through 2024, convert them to year 2022 dollars, the average cost of Vogtle is slightly cheaper than what NuScale's CFPP would have been. Now, I will be polite and I won't say that the name CFPP, there are a lot of other terms that CFPP could stand for than carbon-free power plant. If somebody has the courage to ask me in the chat, I will say it, but I don't want to offend anybody. And as I mentioned a moment ago, there was still 7 years to go in construction of the NuScale SMR. So there's no reason to believe that SMRs will be any less expensive than earlier reactors. Was concern over rising construction costs and power prices why the SMR was canceled? Yes. They only had subscriptions for roughly 120 megawatts of a 462 megawatt project. And NuScale and UAMPS is Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems, had said that they would not go ahead with the project unless they had enough parties to sign contracts for 80% of the power. They promised an $89 per megawatt estimated target price, not a guaranteed price, as I've mentioned. So when you read the contract required parties who remained in the project after a license for construction was granted by the NRC, which is expected to be at the end of 2025 or early 2026, that a party that was staying in the project would be required to pay all of the actual costs of the SMR, even if it was never finished, even if it never provided any power, or was damaged or destroyed, or if you happen to live in a community where there was no transmission to get the power on a specific day from the plant to your community. So new parties did not want to sign a blank check with no guarantee as to how high the ultimate cost of the project would go. That's what killed it. Now, excuse me, I'm going to take a little sip of water. I apologize that my respiratory virus is affecting my voice here. One of the claims made by promoters of SMRs is they're a great tool for fighting climate change, that they can complement wind and solar, so that when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, you can just crank up the power of the SMR and everybody's happy. A number of problems with that theory. One is they take too long to build. So even though we need to reduce our CO2 emissions now, SMRs won't be online for 10, 20, 30 years. The second is that the power from the reactor gets more expensive if they're cycled. Cycled means you turn up the power when wind and solar don't produce, and you turn it down on the power on the SMR when the wind is blowing and or the sun is shining. What this slide shows is that if you crank the power down enough, the capacity factor, which is a measure of how much power the plant produces compared to what it would produce if it operated 100% of the time, if you crank it down enough, the cost per megawatt hour goes up dramatically after a while. That's because almost all of the costs of a nuclear power plant are fixed. Construction costs, the cost of employees, unlike coal plants and gas plants, the price of fuel for nuclear power plants is a very small portion of the total cost. So as you cycle them, the cost would be higher than even the $89 that they were talking about earlier in 2023. And then you can see some of the threats to nuclear. Units on the coast are threatened by ocean level rise and severe storms. Inland units are threatened by storms and severe droughts. Last summer, half of the French government's 56 reactors were either shut down completely or operated on less than full power because there wasn't enough water in the rivers to cool them. And then finally, the SMRs will just compete with renewables for space on transmission lines. This is a comparison that we prepared first last year and then updated it first in 2022, then we updated in 2023. You can see the $89 cost, target cost for the NuScale SMR without the IRA subsidies, and then the 119 cost. Sorry, the 89 is with the subsidies, the 119 is without them. And then you can see estimated costs of power from offshore wind, solar, and storage, land-based wind and solar PV from the U.S. National Renewable Energy Lab's 2023 Annual Technology Baseline Report. And as I've said multiple times, the nuclear costs would have been much higher than we show here. So nuclear was not going to be cheaper. No way, no how. What about the estimated costs of other proposed SMRs? Because I've been focusing on NuScale. NuScale was unique in that they were trying to entice small community utilities into their project, and they had to tell those communities what the current estimated cost of the project was. And each of those communities had to have public meetings where they told their citizens who bought power from them what's the cost of the project. That's how we knew so much. I'm sorry. Now, other reactor designs aren't under the same requirement to tell the public what their projects are going to cost. And I'm going to go to Wyoming and the Bill Gates reactor in a minute. When the cost of the NuScale project went up by 75% between 2021 and January 2023, NuScale and UAMPS blamed higher interest rates and the escalation of construction commodities prices as the reasons for this cost increase. I accept that, but I'd also explain to people, and I do, that it's reasonable to expect that these same factors will lead to similar increases in the costs of other SMRs, especially those with the more exotic designs. So a warning sign, if they don't want to tell you what the cost of the project is going to be or how long it's going to take to build, don't invest. Don't do it. What I ask reporters is, and actually I spoke to a group of private investors. I said, if you went into a car dealership and the car dealer said, I want to sell you a car. The only thing is it hasn't been designed and it hasn't been built and it won't be ready until 2035. And I can't tell you how much it's going to cost. But will you sign this contract to pay me whatever it costs in 2035 or if it's 2040 when it's done? What would you say? If you were polite, you'd say you're out of your effing mind and you'd walk out the door. But that's exactly what the SMR marketers and want the governments and utilities to agree to. No price cap, no schedule requirement, nothing to protect taxpayers or ratepayers. So what's going on with the Natrium reactor? I lived in Seattle for a year, and up the hill, you could see Bill Gates's mansion. And I used to think about the Natrium reactor as I'd walk my dog by his house. As I've said before, they refuse to make public any information on the current cost estimates or anything meaningful about estimated service dates. Now, Pacific Core is conducting an IRP, integrated resource plans, excuse me, in Oregon, Utah, and in Montana. They don't have detailed cost estimates for Natrium in the Utah and Wyoming IRPs. They only have what they call proxy values that do not reflect finalized costs. And I will give anyone a free webinar if they can explain to me what the term proxy values that do not reflect finalized cost actually means, because it's just gibberish. Yet Pacific Core refuses to even reveal what these gibberish numbers are. Gates and TerraPower talk vaguely that the TerraPower reactor, well, they said in the past it would be in service in 2028. Then they delayed it by 2 years, blaming it on the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, because the only place in the world that produces the fuel that the Natrium would use is Russia, which is another red warning sign. No pun intended. So they moved it back to 2030, but it's unclear whether 2030 is a reactor or just a model of the system without any radioactive material. A recent study for large industrial users of electricity in Norway by the Rystad energy consulting firm expresses doubt that the Natrium reactor will be in service by 2040, not 2030, 2040. Now, prudent resource planning by Pacific Core and the Wyoming Public Service Commission and the Utah Public Service Commission and any public service commission should include complete transparency about the estimated costs and in-service schedules for the Natrium and any other SMR. Now, is it reasonable to expect that the costs of building SMRs will decline as more are built? It's called the learning curve. The idea is, and it's basically modeled off of automobile assembly lines. You build a lot of them, you can build them faster, and then the price goes down. There has never been a learning curve for the nuclear industry. In fact, the nuclear industry has had a negative learning curve, which means that the price of building reactors has gone up as more have been built. If some proponent tells you that there will be a learning curve, just remember, it's only an assumption. There's no real evidence. And a lot of these estimates for SMR, future SMR prices include significantly very steep learning curve, which each successive SMR is 5% or 10% cheaper than the preceding one, which means if one costs 100% to build, number 2 will be 95%. Number 3 will be 95% of 95%, and you get it so on. Also, if there is a learning curve, how steep it will be will depend on how many SMRs of each design are built. As I mentioned before, there are currently 80 being proposed around the world. Now, some of them are jokes. Most of them are scams. Well, I don't know, scams is probably an unfair fair word. They're possibly scams, to be more fair. So we don't know how many SMR designs will be built. We don't know how many SMRs of each design will be built. We don't know whether there'll be any flaws in any of those designs that will be fine during construction or operation. So the whole idea that there will be a learning curve is an assumption without any evidence. And finally, excuse me, if you want more information, you can contact me directly. You can go to the IEFA.org/SMR landing page to see some of our reports. You can sign up to get new information from us. And I guess my clock must be wrong. No, I did that in 40 minutes, not bad. And I'm available for any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, David. We have quite a few questions that I've pulled from the chat. Do we see or foresee any companies moving close after NuScale's collapse? I wonder if it's going to shift or affect the nuclear development industry.
The answer is yes. It will shift development. We don't know by how much or exactly what will happen. One of the things I had hoped to do was to have a slide with all these quotes from articles that have come out in the last month after NuScale canceled. One article that came out of Politico Pro the other day was investors are not interested in buying, or something like, wait a minute, this might be it. No, sorry. Basically, investors are not that interested. NuScale scaring off investors. Some utilities who can pass the costs along to their ratepayers, like Northwestern Energy, are still interested in it, as long as they have somebody else to bear the price and the risk. But we'll see what happens over time.
Thanks. All right, next question. Has this presentation been made to the Biden administration or Congress, which is heading towards an all-electric economy powered by nukes no matter what?
No, they don't want to talk to us. We tried to talk to them about funding carbon captured coal plants like Colstrip. When the head of the guy who gives the money out, Jigar Shah, went in, we had heard really good things about him. So I sent him an email trying to set up a meeting. And he said, sure, he'd love to talk to us. And then about 2 months later, he said, well, maybe you ought to talk to my number 2 guy. And then a couple of months later, when I followed up, it was the number 4 guy. And finally, I spoke to, maybe she's the number 1 woman, but she was like the number 8th person in line. They don't want to hear, opinions that are contrary to what they want to do. If you look at their advisory committees on the technologies like hydrogen and carbon capture and the nukes, it's all made by people. It's all basically people who support the technologies. Maybe there'll be a few who don't. But we try to get the message out as fast as we can. Our first report, SMRs, too late, too expensive, too risky, and too uncertain, ran in 200 papers around the country. So we do our best.
Great, thanks. Sorry if you just addressed this, but why do you think the Biden administration is such a strong supporter of developing SMR, considering all the risks?
I think there are a couple of reasons. I think that they honestly believe that they want to address global warming. And starting with the Obama administration, it was the do everything strategy. It's kind of like you go into the restaurant and you know you want to eat dinner, but you order everything on the menu, right? Because you don't know whether they're going to burn the Italian food or the burger or whatever. So you order everything. And that's what they're doing. They're ordering everything, throwing everything against the wall and hoping things stick. Now that's the good side of it. The not so good side of it is the politics. The nuclear industry gives a lot of money to politicians in both parties. And I'm sure that in the negotiations about what would be in the bipartisan infrastructure law in 2021 and the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, there was pressure to include nuclear. The third reason is that a lot of the people who work in the Department of Energy have been pushing nuclear power plants in the 1960s. And now they see, hey, an opportunity to get more money for nuclear power. So you mix those 3 things, and I honestly believe Biden himself is trying to do the right thing. What he's being told is the necessary thing. It's unfortunate that people who think that we're going to waste billions and tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, or we don't have access to talk to him.
All right, here's one that we get a lot. I get a lot at tabling events. And it's about the US Navy and how they've been using nuclear reactors, especially in like submarines and other places to power. Specifically, this question is, why are the US Navy nuclear reactors, which range from 50 megawatts to 200 megawatts electric, not considered SMRs? Why are these proven if expensive technologies not being adapted from utility service?
Excuse me. One of the good parts of doing what I do is I get emails from people I don't know. Now, some of them are not so friendly, but some of them were wonderful. One of the series was from a man who used to work on a nuclear submarine. Now, he couldn't disclose any confidential information to me, right? For national security reasons. We don't know how well the reactors work on submarines, and we sure as hell don't know how much they cost. So there's no reason to say that just because they work on submarines that they're going to be financially viable in your neighborhood or in Montana or in Colstrip. It's a good idea. It's a good theory, right? If the government would give out the information on how well the reactors have worked and how much it has cost, then we might be able to know whether they're a viable option. But again, the military doesn't care about how much it costs. They want to get it right because it's national security, and we want them to do that. I think that answers the question. If the person asking it has any numbers on what it cost or how well they worked, I'd be happy to hear them.
All right. We have several people in the chat pointing to specific projects around the world, in Russia or Britain, or some of the plans coming out of COP28. There's a general kind of sense that a lot of people are working towards this and have put a lot of hope and faith into these projects. I don't know if there's a specific question there, if you have any thoughts, David, but it just, to me, seems like people are looking for that silver bullet.
Everybody is always attracted by the flashy object. Back in, is somebody writing something?
Yeah, I'm gonna clear all drawings.
Okay, I'll ignore it. Back in 2004, when there was a renaissance, it was like the fourth renaissance plan for the nuclear industry. I spoke before investors on Wall Street with someone named Peter Bradford, who was on the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission at the time of 3 Mile Island. And Peter pointed out that people just get distracted by the flashy object and all of the promises that are made. I mean, I understand it. If you're living in a place like Colstrip and you're told the coal plant's going to be retired, and somebody else comes along and says, well, we can build a cheap nuclear power plant and put it in your community and give you jobs, it sure sounds appealing until you start looking at the facts. As to the claims that world nuclear capacity is going to triple, I mean, as my colleague who teaches in Canada, who you may have heard of, Ramana says it's PR pixie dust. It's just fairy dust being spread, and that seems to be true.
All right, I got a couple more here. Can you speak a little bit about the nuclear waste problem, David? I know there's a lot to be said, but somebody in the chat just was asking.
Yes, I have focused intentionally, I have not focused on waste. I have talked just about finance. Yes, there's concern about where do you put the waste from these reactors. There's no place to put it. No state in the US wants to take it. For a while, they tried to bribe Nevada or force Nevada to take it. That's not working. And I think it's not a crime in terms of law and order, a crime, but it's an ethical crime to be making nuclear waste that's going to be around for 100,000 years, because companies don't want to do renewable energy. And I don't think people would be real happy. See, part of the idea behind these SMRs is they'll be small, so there'll be lots of them spread around. I don't think people are going to be real thrilled to find out that there's going to be a nuclear waste dump at the corner of their street or just outside their town, or that there'll be trucks picking up nuclear waste and driving it through their town or city to put it someplace else. People won't like that.
Totally agree. All right, here's another one. Is there a specific part of reactor construction that drives the ballooning prices and runaway timelines? For example, safety precautions, material requirements, labor, something else?
They got them all, that's all. We want them to be safe. It takes a lot of concrete. It takes a lot of steel. It takes a lot of copper wiring. It takes a lot of people to build them. Now, the nuclear industry blames the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, for being so tough on them. But the NRC isn't tough on them at all. Regulations have been eased up over decades. Each time the industry has pretty much gotten what it wants. But there's one benefit to beating up on the NRC. It's like beating up on a puppy. They don't fight back. Part of the NRC's job is to promote nuclear power. So they don't say back, no, it's not our fault. It's Georgia Power's fault for building the cost of Vogtle going up. So they're an easy target to swing at. Now, I am not advocating beating up puppies. We have puppies. We love puppies.
That's a relief. I was about to question everything, David.
I know, I was afraid you'd get a couple more questions.
No,
But
I think
also
we're
ducks, kittens, they all fit in there.
I think we're near the end of our questions. I wanted to make sure before people jump off to mention we have a part 2. So I'm gonna take over sharing screen real quick, David. Part 2 is going to be in-person events in Missoula, Billings, and Bozeman, January 24th, the 25th, and the 30th in the public libraries. We're going to share a video from Montana PBS, and then Ann Hedges and Nick Fitzmaurice, who are both on the call, and then someone from our friends at the Montana chapter of the Sierra Club are going to be there to talk about it. This video from Montana PBS really talks about the viability of nuclear in Montana. And, you know, based on this conversation, based on our research and what we've seen, and, you know, the already generating sources from a lot of renewables in Montana, it'll be an interesting conversation. So if you're around, we hope to see you. We're going to provide some snacks, and just make a note of these dates here. And we've been sending emails out about them as well. And then I also just want to share
one more piece.
Oh.
The presentations that we're going to be giving next in part 2 are not just about nuclear. They're about other ways to reach our decarbonization goals without nuclear. So we want to address nuclear, but we want to also move beyond and talk about solutions. So join us at one of those meetings if it's near you, and we can chat about, you know, not that we're going to be shivering in the dark because we don't go with nukes or coal. There are options available to us now, And that's what we want to talk about. And some of them you probably have never heard about. So it'll be fun.
Yes, and here's contact information again for David. Also David Merrill, our partner at the Montana chapter of the Sierra Club, and Anne, whose email I misspelled. So I'll put that in the chat instead.